Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Family Scrutiny Board. My name is Councillor Alan Lamb. I'm the chair of the board. Just to tell everybody that the meeting is being webcast on the council's website, so any interested members of the public that can't attend in person can still observe remotely. So welcome to the millions of people who'll be tuning in at home. As everyone knows, this is the best scrutiny board in the city, if not the country, and you're all very welcome to join us this morning. So as is our custom, I'll ask our board members to introduce themselves first, and then the officers once it comes to the items relevant to them. So if I can start to my left, please.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Peter Carlill from Carville in Farsley. I'm substituting today for Councillor Heselwood.
Good morning, Celia Foote, school staff representative.
Tony Britton, representing Roman Catholic Diocese.
Good morning, Councillor Denise Reagan from Bermondsey Soft, Richmond Hill.
Good morning, Councillor Zara Hussain from the Roundhay Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Emmy Bromley from Horsforth Ward.
Good morning, Jordan Bowden from the Roundhay Ward.
Good morning, Kaylee Brooks from Little London and Woodhouse Ward, and I believe I'm subbing for Lisa Martin today.
Hi there, Councillor Hannah Bithell from Kirkstall Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Guiseley and Rawdon, subbing for Councillor Karen Renshaw.
Apologies. Andrew Graham, representing the Church of England Diocese.
Good morning, Laura Whitaker, representing the voluntary sector.
Good morning, Councillor Anne Forsyth, Farnham and Wortley Ward.
Morning, Chris Howley, Councillor for Wheatwood Ward.
Good morning, I'm Kathleen Ward and I represent the parent governors for secondary schools.
Hello, Ryan Stevenson, representing the Howard Ward.
Good morning, Angela Brogden, Principal Scrutiny Advisor.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting. So before we move to the agenda, there's just a couple of announcements that I wanted to make. So some members will be aware and some won't that the Director of Children's Services, Sal Tariq, will be moving on to a new role in September. He sent his apologies for this morning, and unfortunately this will be the last meeting he would have been attending. So I did meet with him and some of his other colleagues the other day and insisted and told him he didn't have a choice, that he must come to our meeting in September, despite the fact he'll moved on, so we can thank him for his work properly and wish him well in his new role. So he's agreed to do that. So he will be coming to see us in September, but just so everybody's aware of that. And then the second thing I want to say is that many of you, thank you for attending. We had a little ceremony just before this meeting, which is why we've started a little late, and it's Celia Foote's last meeting this morning after 20 years as a co-opted member of the board. And for those of us that are elected, still it's a privilege to do this job and to serve on this board, but it's part of the role that we're elected to do. But the co-opted members are incredibly invaluable, probably on this board more than any other, and the things that they bring are incredibly powerful. And Celia, for 20 years, has diligently attended this board. I think, Angela, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm the 7th chair you've managed to see off, Celia. Well, you haven't seen me off yet. I outlasted you. It's fair to say we probably don't agree on absolutely every issue, but there's one or two things. But what's without question is your passion and commitment for children and young people, for the teaching profession, and to trying to do the best that you possibly can to give a real powerful voice to those people that need it around the table. And you've done that incredibly well. And it's probably disturbing to both of us quite how many things we've agreed on over been on this board. But so I just wanted to say as the current chair, on behalf of all the former chairs that you've worked with and all the members of the board, thank you. And on behalf of all the children, the teachers that you've represented, they couldn't have asked for anyone better to represent them. So you had a lovely tribute from the Lord Mayor this morning, which was thoroughly deserved. But before we start your final meeting, thank you for the cake, and thank you for everything that you've done. No, thank you. Okay, so on with the show. If I can ask Angela to introduce the first 5 items of business, please.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to agenda item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. In relation to item 2, there are no items excluded from the public domain. Under item 3, there are no late items of business. Under item 4, can I please ask members to make any declarations of interest at this point? And I shall take silence as none, thank you. And in relation to item 5, we have apologies from Councillor Martin, with Councillor Brooks attending as substitute member, Councillor Hesselwood, with Councillor Carlisle attending as substitute member, Councillor Renshaw, with Councillor Thompson attending as substitute member, from Councillor Senior, from Councillor Richards, and I've had notification that our co-opted member Kate Blacker may be attending a bit later to the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Angela. So item 6 is the minutes of our last meeting of the 8th of June, which will be on pages 5 and 10 of your agenda pack. So first of all, can I just ask members present to approve that they were an accurate reflection of the meeting? And yes, I'm getting nods. And then are there any matters arising from those minutes that we're not covering in the agenda? And again, I'll take silence as a no. So we can move on to the bones of the agenda now. So we're on to item 7, which is the Ofsted inspection report. And so if I can ask Councillor Venner and the officers to introduce themselves, and then I'll start with Councillor Venner, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Councillor Fiona Venner. I'm the Executive Board Member for Children and Adult Social Care, Early Years and Health Partnerships.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Julie Longworth and I'm Deputy Director for Children and Families.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ruth Terry, Chief Officer for Children's Social Work.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shaheen Myers. I'm Deputy Director of Learning.
Okay, thank you, everyone. You're all very welcome. We've had some apologies from Councillor Jonathan Pryor, who I understand has tested positive for COVID, but I'm sure, being the diligent member he is, he'll be tuning in at home, so we'll send him our good wishes from the board. So this item, members will recall that we consider the findings of the Ofsted inspectors following the 2-day focus visit to Leeds in July 2021, and more recently in relation to the full inspection of children's social care that was undertaken in late February and early March. The report you've been provided with today presents an update on the outcomes of the inspection that relate to the front door focused visit recommendations, as well as setting out the planned actions to respond to the recommendations arising from the recent inspection. So we'll take it as read that everybody's read the report, but I'm sure Councillor Venner will want to make some introductory remarks, and then we'll ask Julie to take us through the report and go into questions and comments. So Councillor Venner,
Thank you, Chair. I wondered first if I could make a couple of comments about other issues. I wanted to just refer to last night, just to reassure you, I do not mean the politics of last night, exciting though that was, but even more exciting than what was happening on the political stage. On the stage of City Varieties, we had the Child Friendly Leeds Awards, which a number of councillors in the room were at, which were just incredible. It was the 10th birthday awards, and it was such an inspiring, uplifting night. A number of the winners, when they came on stage, talked about how proud they were to be in this city, how much they love being part of Child Friendly Leeds, how much support they get from the citizens of the city, which included Leeds Baby Bank and Zarek, who support bed poverty. Both said they get a huge amount of support from the council and partners on the city. The performers were amazing, just so much talent, and it was just lovely. I also felt I needed to refer to it by way of explanation, because although I've washed my face multiple times, I've had a bit of difficulty removing all the glitter. So if I'm a bit sparkly, that's why. also, Chair, you referred to Sal moving into another role, and I think it would be great if he could come here in September. He's had an incredibly challenging tenure. He became the DCS in February 2020. So if you think about what happened the following month, it couldn't have been more challenging. And to have led the directorate to get outstanding out of that is incredible. And he's moving into the strengthening families, supporting children, part of the children's world, which is all our dissemination work, which brings in literally millions to the council, but is also how we disseminate our practice. So we do support other councils that are struggling with children's services. Our previous DCS made the same move, but is now more or less full-time in Bradford. And so Sal's going to move over there to head up that work. And finally, I just wanted to thank Celia hugely for all your support over 20 years, which is amazing. I'm really sorry I couldn't come to the ceremony this morning. I had to do something else, but thank you so much. Thank you for bringing cake as well. There's something wonderfully decadent about having cake for breakfast. So thank you for everything. When we presented the Ofsted report 2 meetings ago, I did say at that point that we can never be complacent in children's services, because outstanding does not mean perfection. And we know, even with an outstanding rating, we will not get it right for every child every time. And there will still be tragic, awful things, that children endure in this city. And you just cannot be complacent when you're in children's services. And also, even an outstanding report will always give you areas for improvement, which this report has. And so we will always have an improvement plan. And this improvement plan will replace the one that we put in place after the focused visit in July of 2021, which, as I said at the meeting where we presented the Ofsted report, that was quite a critical visit. But they did say in the Ofsted report that every single thing they'd identified as an area for improvement had improved to their satisfaction. So Julie will talk through the detail of our improvement plan, but it is part of our ongoing learning and improvement journey, and not being complacent and always wanting to get better outcomes for children and families. Thank you, Chair.
So just in terms of the report really sets out the recommendations that we were given following the focused visit to our front door. And it also sets out the recommendations of the most recent full ILAC inspection this year. You will see in the report that in the ILAC inspection this year, what the inspectors found was that all of the recommendations and all of the areas for improvement highlighted in the 21 focused visit had been met, and had been met in full. As Councillor Venner has said, the areas that had been identified were around assessments, was around including key information, family history in assessments. It was also around supervision, recording, managerial decisions and oversight. These are all things that we have got to constantly focus on. So while the ILAC inspection this year found that the recommendations of the focused visit last year had been met in full, these are all areas that we continue to focus on, and that's the point about not being complacent, recognising that these are key areas for us and for the workforce. In relation to the ILAC, the 2 recommendations were around contingency planning in children's written plans, and also consistent decision making for strategy discussions. In relation to contingency planning for children's written plans, what the inspectors found when they spoke to social workers is that all of the social workers that they spoke to could talk about the contingency plans. So there were contingency plans for children. Social workers were very clear about those, but there could be improvement in terms of how they were recorded on the plans. So that will be the focus. As you will see in the report, there's already a lot of activity underway in relation to that. That includes the fact that a task and finish group has been established, and that's really to in particular look at some of our existing plans. So where we have children on child in need plans, children who are subject to child protection plans, the contingency plans should be apparent in those existing plans, and it's the whole, I suppose, focus on having the one plan, which includes contingency. We're reviewing our electronic recording system, again, to support staff in terms of highlighting those contingency plans and being able to record those easily. We have an interactive learning audit, which we undertake with staff, and part of that is having the conversation, having the discussion with staff, and so we're going to build in conversations around contingency planning within those audits, and again that will be part of our ongoing regular quality assurance programme. We're also doing some work with our child protection chairs. So, as an example, they have a real key role in ensuring the quality of plans, ensuring that plans are being progressed in a timely and effective way, and ensuring that contingency plans are utilised if that is necessary. In relation to the strategy discussions and the consistency of strategy discussions, as you will see in the report, this was actually an area. We have a weekly referral review in Leeds. It takes place every Monday. It's a multi-agency meeting, so it includes colleagues from health, colleagues from police, colleagues from children's social work, education, early help. And what they do is they look at the work that has come through the front door in the previous week. So it's a really key part of our quality assurance system. And inspectors observed that meeting. And during that meeting, colleagues highlighted that some of the work that had been undertaken around strategy discussions could have benefited from more consistency. So what's reassuring about that is that the quality assurance process that we have in place identified that, and inspectors were able to see that in action. So in relation to that, there's a number of action plans set out in the report. They include our principal social work doing some particular work with individual team managers, and from July actually being based in our offices alongside team managers. We recognise that we have had new team managers who have joined us during the pandemic. We've not always had the opportunity to have that face-to-face contact and modelling and coaching. So that's a key area. You'll also note that we did develop some practice guidance in 2021, and we're now reviewing that, and there will be a second set of practice guidance which will be written, and again that's, I suppose, focusing in particular where we have children and young people who are already known to the service and who already have an existing social worker, but whereby there may need to be a strategy discussion in relation to that child or young person and what the process is for that, as opposed to where it's a new referral. So there's a whole host of actions set out in the paper. What I would say is the two key areas for us, and again both of those areas in relation to strategy discussions, in relation to planning, are at the core of our activity, so that it's something that we have to constantly go around in terms of our workforce development, supervision, performance management, quality assurance processes. And I'll finish there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Right, questions and comments, please. Who wants to go first? Unusually quiet this morning. Yes, Kate.
Am I on? Sorry, haven't used this for a while. It's just a practical query, actually, just as you were talking a lot about contingency planning, which I think is obviously really important. And I can see how that can be missed in actually recording because quite often it's a moving feast, isn't it, as well? So just in terms of implementation of contingency planning, obviously those contingency plans can change, can't they? So how are you going to ensure that that is regularly reviewed and updated to make sure that what's actually on paper reflects what the contingency plan might be at any given time? Because obviously care plans are not reviewed. Well, they are reviewed regularly, aren't they? But, you know, if in the meantime the contingency plan changes, will there be a process to ensure that that's then reflected in the paperwork?
Absolutely. And these are some of the issues that we are discussing with our practitioners, with team managers, with service delivery managers, because it is dynamic. It can be, you know, it's a moving picture all of the time. And that's where some of the work in terms of our electronic systems and actually how we make those more helpful to staff in terms of some of that dynamic recording. I think the other issue is actually how we have those conversations with children and families. So we are doing some work around our, you know, again, our commitment to a restorative approach, and actually how we bring that high support, but also that high challenge to the work that we are involved with. And also, I suppose, that transparency, clarity, openness and honesty with families about those contingency plans. So for me, the recording is absolutely key, but equally is the conversation with the families and also how we record that conversation and that mutual understanding.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Howley, please.
Thank you, Chair. The report refers to issues with staffing, numbers of social workers and the quality of work with high caseloads. Is there a potential problem brewing here that needs more attention being put to it? Is there a danger that a future report will significantly be weaker because of these staffing problems?
So this is a key priority for us, as you would expect, us and every other local authority across the country, because this is a national issue. I'd also say that it's not just an issue in relation to social work, it's actually an issue with the public sector and with other sectors for that matter. So as you would expect, we have a whole host of an action plan around that in terms of recruitment, in terms of retention. We've talked previously about looking at the pathways, not just into social work, but into youth work, into early help, looking at our apprenticeships. I was out the week before last talking to 4 social work assistants who have recently joined us from other sectors. And my immediate conversation with them was, do you want to progress? Are you interested in the apprenticeship? How can we support you to do that? And all of them said that actually in coming to Leeds and in coming into the social work assistant post, their focus and their ambition was to progress into a qualified role. So it's a key priority for us in terms of support to staff, you know, because it is a challenging time. As it's set out in the report, caseloads were higher than we would like. So again, that's where supervision, the focus on well-being, you know, the conversations that we're having at the moment in terms of appraisal and well-being being an absolute priority in that, you know, are all part of the action plan. So you're right to raise that as a question, and it's something that we are actively working on and will continue to do so.
Thank you. And just to reassure you as well, Councillor Howley, it's in our work programme later in the year to do a piece of work on workforce planning for social work and schools. So it is something that we'll very much be keeping an eye on as well. Tony, please.
Connected with that, some time ago, there was a lot of discussion about how many cases each social worker had and complaints that they couldn't do the work because there were so many cases being put onto them. What's the situation now? Roughly how many cases do each social worker have?
So we have our social workers have an average caseload at the moment. We manage that and monitor that on a regular basis. So the average is around 21 at the moment. some social workers, we monitor that in terms of newly qualified social workers. Those social workers are more experienced and are advanced practitioners as well, and they all do a slightly different role. We would still like it to be lower than that, and I think, as Julie's talked about, just in terms of those where we've got some gaps in recruitment, that is absolutely our focus. So we do want to bring those caseloads back down again, and it is all part of the same picture.
How does that fit in with the national picture?
So actually we still fare very well in terms of our average caseload. And if you look at local authorities, surrounding local authorities, again, we compare very, very well. But as Ruth said, it's an area that we can't be complacent on, and it is around ensuring that all social workers have got that support through supervision, as I've said, through those wellbeing discussions. Our advanced practitioners are key to this. So we have a particular role in Leeds that's not found in every local authority, whereby we have advanced practitioners who don't carry a full caseload. They're experienced workers, and they help social workers, newly qualified social workers, as an example, with assessments and with the quality of their work. So it's an additional support for all of our social work staff.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stevenson, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it might be worth us looking. I don't know how we do this, presumably through the constitution of the council, but to request at some point that the composition of our body includes a co-opted voice from the social work sector specifically, because I think it's fair to say that social workers in the city have been quite keen to watch these meetings of late, significantly the one we had with the independent safeguarding chair. And I think this morning, they need somebody to speak for them and challenge some accusations, some suggestions have been made. So can I just ask Ruth Terry, when you said 21 is the average case load, can you give us the number, the average caseload removing the advanced practitioners, i.e. what's the average caseload for a social worker, not an advanced practitioner?
I don't have all those to hand, Councillor Stevenson, but they range. There's a whole range of different caseloads. So, for example, in our child health and disability service, they've got a different level of caseload because the work there is much more complex. There's different type of work that they do. Our newly qualified social workers have a different level of caseload, and we average it out as well in terms of FTE. So depending on how many hours the social workers work. So it is a complex picture in terms of how the average caseload is worked out. And advanced practitioners would usually hold a lower caseload, but then co-work the more complex cases with our social workers, complex assessments. So not necessarily allocated a case, but doing the complex assessment work alongside our social workers.
So when you calculate the average of the answer you've just given to Tony, is it correct that what you're doing is you're including that figure that an advanced practitioner might have, say, 6 cases, and a frontline social worker might have, say, 50 cases, and when you reach the average, that's how you get to the average of 21?
The advanced practitioners and newly qualified social workers, it's worked out on a percentage of their time for allocated work. So it isn't worked out that you'd have a full-time advanced practitioner with 6 cases. It's a proportion of their time that does casework. So a certain amount of FTE. So there is a complex calculation that takes place to get the average caseload, but it is right that different social workers will have different caseloads across the service.
Do you recognise the figure of the average caseload for a frontline social worker is actually around 40 cases at present?
Yeah, that's not my understanding, Councillor Stevenson. I think what we would say and what we have said and what we really acknowledged with Ofsted is that in some instances, the caseloads for social workers are not what we would want. And as I've said, that's a national challenge. It's a challenge that's being faced by every local authority. What we are doing in those instances where we do have social workers who do have a higher caseload is, as I've said, and as Ruth has said, is providing all the support to them that we can. We've also, our service delivery managers work together. They meet on a weekly basis to look at where we do have to distribute cases, perhaps differently across the city, if that's what we need to do in order to ensure that we retain safe levels of of casework. But again, it's we have to be really clear and very honest and open. It's not where we would want to be, but it is a national issue at the moment, and it's it's something that we're really focusing on, and we have a huge action plan around that.
I think the trade unions representing those social workers might dispute the figures around average cases. But as a final question on this section, Chair, Julie, can you and others confirm that there is actually a live grievance that you've received regarding caseloads? And part of that grievance is that frontline social workers are concerned that they can't ensure the safeguarding of children in the city because of the high numbers of caseloads they're receiving.
Councillor Stevenson, we wouldn't comment in a public forum such as this around any individual grievances. That's not what we would do.
Well, forgive me, I'm not asking you to comment on individual grievances. I'm asking you to confirm whether there are currently any live grievances from the social care staff, and that's quite important for us as elected members and scrutiny board to understand and query what you're telling us as the senior officers.
Actually, I'll come in here, Chair, if that's okay. I think Julie's been very clear that it's not appropriate in a public forum to comment on confidential HR matters, and we won't be commenting further. Obviously, Chair, we're happy to brief you in private and talk with you about how the Scrutiny Board might be informed of a number of things that are happening in the Directorate, but we're not going to comment now on confidential HR matters.
Chair, can I then request some advice from legal on that issue, please? Because we're a scrutiny board of elected members, and we're co-opted members, and we're sitting here to try and understand what's going on in the context of the city. I haven't asked for any individual HR information. I've asked a very simple question around whether employees of this council have raised concerns with the leaders here, and if the leaders aren't prepared to tell us that there are concerns being raised, how are we meant to scrutinise the actions of the leaders? So I'd like some legal advice at some point, please, around what the role of scrutiny is and how we get this information, stop the cover-ups that are going on.
Sorry, that is really inappropriate. It is not a cover-up. And I would just remind you, we have just had our regulator crawling all over us for a very intensive 3-week inspection in which we were found to be an outstanding authority for children's services. It is not a cover-up. I have said we will talk privately to the chair and we will discuss with him the most appropriate way to involve scrutiny. But we are not, in this meeting, going to comment on what is a confidential HR matter.
Okay. If I can say if I can first of all ask that everybody comes through the chair, just so we keep the meeting in order. Secondly, we don't have a legal advisor to the board present, so it's something we need to take up outside of the meeting, which I'm happy to do, and then feed back to all members. But I think for the time being, we'll have to leave it there, and then we'll pick it up appropriately outside of the meeting if everybody's comfortable with that. I did have one question in mind on a similar vein, just to and then Kate wanted to come in, and it was just really, if you could tell us you told us the average, what's the extreme, what's the most cases that a social worker in the city at the moment would have?
Councillor Lamb, what I'd like to do really is to get an accurate, I think given the conversation that's going on, is to get an absolute accurate picture of that, and then I'll be very happy to feed back to you. What I would say, and I think what I have said, is that we know that this is an area of priority for us. We're being very clear and very transparent, as we were with Ofsted and as we are being today, that it's a national issue. that it's a priority for us and that we have a number of actions underway. You know, so it's the live conversations, and we have been very transparent and open about that.
Okay, thank you. Kate, please.
I think it's more of a comment probably in light of the discussions that we've had, but I can speak with experience of working in legal services directly with social workers in this authority in the past, and also working in social care for a different authority at the moment, and say that I think it's probably not that accurate to talk about numbers of caseload, because individual cases vary so much in terms of the amount of work that's involved, in terms of the complexity of the cases, in terms of the need to involve more senior staff within the department, the involvement of legal, particularly if there are proceedings. So I don't think we can really just go by numbers. And I think what I would expect is that caseloads would reflect the experience of the individual practitioner, and that there would be oversight by senior management to identify what additional support might be needed on a particular case. And obviously, if legal are involved, there's additional support that goes in. So I don't think just talking about numbers is particularly helpful.
Okay, thank you. Andrew is next, please.
Yeah, mine was more of a comment than a question. And just having read the report as a whole, I just wanted to say, you know, as a representative of the diocese, well done to you and all your teams. I mean, it has been a hugely challenging time, and anybody working at the coalface of children's services past 2 years will know that it's often been in the face of less capacity than we'd have liked and less resource than we'd have liked. So I think it's a great achievement, and reflects well on the work that's been done. So well done.
Thank you for that. And I would just like to, I suppose, just to reiterate our thanks to our staff, because this is about team leads, you know, every individual member of staff at every single level of the organisation, the contribution that they make, and our invaluable partners across the city.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any more hands, so if I can move to the recommendations. So first of all, it's just to note progress on the recommendations from the front door focused inspection, and to approve completion of the actions taken. So are we happy to do that? Yep. And then B is to note the recommendations from the further ILACS inspection and the actions set out in relation to these. And obviously it's something that we'll be monitoring going forward as well. So we're happy to do that. Okay, right. Thank you very much. So we can now move on to item 8, which is a refresh of the Children and Young People's Plan. So we've got some more guests coming to join us. So just by way of introduction, the Children and Young People's Plan is the shared vision for everyone working with children and young people in Leeds. The plan is now being refreshed to take account of the current national picture and evolving local challenges. The refresh process is in the early planning stages, and today's meeting enables a first opportunity for scrutiny members to review the existing plan and to discuss areas that may be changed during the refresh process. So to assist with the discussion, paragraph 6 of the report sets out a number of questions aimed at helping to shape the early development of a draft plan. So we've got a couple of new members. So if I can ask Chris and Hannah to introduce themselves, and then I'll ask Councillor Venner to make some introductory comments.
Good morning, I'm Chris Hudson, a Performance Programme Manager working in the Children and Families Directorate.
Good morning, Hannah Lamplew, Voice and Influence Lead in the Children and Families Directorate. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Venner, if you'd like to kick us off, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the Children and Young People's Plan underpins all our work in the Directorate. And as you'll know from the report, it's due for refresh. So the report's setting out how that will be done. I mean, it may not change dramatically from the plan we've got now, in that the 3 obsessions of wanting to reduce the number of children in care, you know, reducing the number of children that aren't, you know, that are neat, and improving attainment and achievement in school is still really relevant. And also the outcomes as well feel like they're the outcomes we would want for our children and families. We did pick up that the outcome, we want children to have fun growing up. Actually, nowhere in the current children's plan does it mention play. which I don't quite know how that got missed really, but I think we will include something about the importance of play. That was really magnified, I think, during COVID when children were trapped at home, particularly if they didn't have access to green space. So I think we will include something about the children having access to play within the refreshed plan. When we presented the Ofsted report, Sal and I were both asked what we thought was the biggest challenge for the department going forward. We hadn't planned in advance, but we both said child poverty. That's right in the middle of the current plan, as you'll see on the page, and it's hard to think it won't be central in the new plan given what families are facing at the moment. However, I've been saying it may not change that much. It might, because I don't want to preempt what will come out of the consultation, which is really important. And Hannah's here from the Voice and Influence team, and the voice of the child will be really central in this. It's one of a really key element of our work and of Child Friendly Leeds is about the central voice of children, which came out really clearly in the Ofsted report, that children who the inspectors met said they felt they could have an influence and they mattered and their voices were heard. Hannah, I don't think you were here when I spoke on the last item. The first thing I said was how wonderful last night was. It was an absolutely uplifting, inspiring event. So huge congratulations to your team. You've just pulled off a really fantastic evening. So in this report, you've got on page 24 the timetable of the refresh, which includes the consultation, which Hannah's team will be a really integral part of. As you'll see, it comes back here for a final review in January before going to Exec Board and full council. So we do want you to be involved, and you will get to see, you'll get to do a final review before it becomes the finished report. So we'll look forward to working with you in the next few months as we refresh the Children and People's Plan. So I'll hand over to Hannah or Julie, or if anyone wants to add more detail. Thank you, Chair.
We're going to hand over to Chris, first of all, who'll just set out a little bit more detail around the timeline and also some of the consultation that's already been undertaken. And then Chris will going to hand over to Hannah just to talk about the wishes of the children and young people, and actually how we can ensure that they're aligned with our children and young people's plan.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, this is the first time that the discussion around the refresh has come into the public arena. We've held a series of internal discussions with our leadership team to agree the refresh, outline the timetable, and based on those conversations and the outputs from this meeting, we'll start the process of developing a draft plan that we will use to consult on, and that will cover the period 2023 to 2028. And as was mentioned earlier, there's some discussion points and questions at point 6 in the covering report that hopefully will start the conversation, but we are expecting the conversation to go to areas we haven't yet covered. For example, last time the affordable and safe transport priority wasn't something that featured in the early discussions, and that came directly from consultation with young people. So we're certainly expecting areas to come out that maybe we haven't yet talked about in detail. We have some other partnership conversations and meetings that we will be going to over the summer. We'll also be holding conversations to make sure we align to the new Best City ambition before a formal consultation process. In terms of the formal consultation process, we think that's likely to run in October through to November, which would allow us to come back to scrutiny on the 12th of October as part of a formal consultation process. We think it's likely to be an online questionnaire, which is what we did last time, and we'll be certainly letting all elected members, partners, staff know that when that consultation is out. It'll last for at least 6 weeks, and we're hopeful we'll get lots of good responses to help us shape the final plan. We will think of the best ways to share the consultation more widely, particularly for those who have limited or no access to the internet. One way we might consider, for example, is asking if schools may be able to find opportunities for young people to complete the questionnaire during school time. But there's other routes we might want to think of as well. Maybe libraries might be another option. And in terms of the consultation with young people, I think probably it's best if I pass over to Hannah now, who's going to talk, as Julie said, about the wishes, the work that's already gone on, and how we will do any further consultation with young people over the next 2 to 3 months. Thank you.
Hi. So hopefully, I think Angela had forwarded the two-sided summary of the wishes. Yeah. So just for those of you, because some of you will have been involved right from the start in 2010 when we first launched the wishes at the start of Child Friendly Leeds, and they're really aspirations when we think about the children and young people. What would make our city more of a child-friendly city? And we used a similar approach this year and our 10th anniversary to refresh the wishes, whereby we looked back over the last 3 years at data, and we looked at 3 years because obviously 2 years has been quite a unique 2-year period. And we've got a voice and influence network. So we used key consultations, surveys. We now have elections for our youth parliament and our children's mayor. We're looking at the themes coming out from those manifestos. What are the top issues young people voted for? So citywide consultation data and community data as well. And then we use that to identify key themes. And a lot of those linked back to the existing wishes. So to refresh the wishes, we then went out to all of our youth voice groups on our networks and invited them to be involved in refreshing those wishes and working directly in partnership with children and young people. So in total, we worked with about 68 young people, some of those from the youth service, third sector. We went into a couple of primary schools, worked with our Send Youth Forum, Youth Council, really fascinating, just unpicking some of the wording and really thinking about refreshing those 12 wishes. And we have those for you today, which we've shared. So what we're really keen to do, because you may think, well, how come we've left it 10 years to refresh those wishes and what are they used for? And I suppose they have really provided that sort of framework for child friendly, similarly to the UN Convention of the Rights of a Child. But what we want to do more is really align that with the refresh of the Children and People's Plan. So we've been working with Chris, and it's really timely that we have, it's nearly a year, isn't it, to the refresh of the Children and People's Plan, that we want those wishes to feed into the refresh of the Children and People's Plan. We want clear reference to the wishes. We want more of a reference to the UN Convention of the Rights of a Child. And as Councillor Venner pointed out, we do have a Leeds commitment to play. And shortly, I'll be recruiting to a strategic play officer, which will be able to sort of support a lot of this work around strategic play. We want to incorporate play more into the plan. As many of you know, the top issue, which has got even more of a significant issue through the pandemic for children and people, is around mental health. So that's why it's at the top of those wishes and is a strategic priority of lots of different boards across the city. But specifically in the wish, it's the wording around they want to know where to get information and advice, who to speak to help them find services and support, and it's available to them when they need it. So that's really a priority of young people that we'll be looking at in the Children and Young People's Plan. And as Chris mentioned, celebrating difference, diversity, tackling discrimination, how can we really incorporate that into an approach perhaps, or whether it's a measure within the Children and People's Plan. And one last point was 2023 is going to be our year of culture, and we don't actually include culture within our Children and People's Plan, and that did come out from Children and Young People and is incorporated within the wishes there. So when the two documents are more merged together and inform each other, I feel really positive. So we've done lots of consultation, but we'll be working with Chris to go out and potentially speak to some more targeted groups and things, just to check back on the wishes and on the plan with them. So I hope that's a helpful summary for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And can I just start by thanking you for coming to us at such an early stage in the process, because it's something all scrutiny boards bang on about, is get us involved early, and I'm really grateful for you doing that, and hopefully it will add value and help it to be the best plan it can be. So it's really helpful that you're here at this stage. So if I can refer members to page 18 and paragraph 6, where there's a number of questions that are asked of us. I have seen a number of hands already go up, so we're not restricted to these questions by any means, but there are things particularly that we need to focus on. So I'll take the hands that I've seen, and then we can work through, if they're not picked up, we can, but if you kind of keep them in your mind when you're making your comments and asking your questions. So had Councillor Carlill first, please.
Thank you, Chair. And luckily I was focusing on a couple of those questions. I was involved a couple of years ago in a few bits around the transport side when I was the engagement chair at Wyker for transport in Leeds. And so I was going to focus a little bit on that and then a bit wider. So I'd say that's absolutely still a priority, and I'm sure young people are still raising that as an issue. I mean, we've got the overall Leeds transport strategy that acknowledges that there are many more opportunities available to those in the city with a car at present than there are those that haven't. And 30% of households don't have a car across the city, much higher in some communities than others. But for children and young people, as I see in my area and we'll see everywhere, it's not just the opportunity of whether your household has access to a car, it's then whether somebody is willing and able to drive you to wherever you may need to be. So I think it is a huge issue. So in terms of that, I was just wondering, now I know conversations happened at the combined authority, which is obviously the transport authority at that stage. I was wondering if there was an update on how those had gone, so that we could maybe discuss how that worked further, because I think the views of children and young people are really important in that. I was then going to widen that out to, and when I looked at these 12 priorities, I'll say, I had a little tot up, and I think at least 7 of them are made easier by better access to transport. You know, the ones around culture, have places to play, hang out and have fun, etc. There are so many of these that transport could impact on that I think it therefore should be a real priority. Coming out of that, I guess, is that voice part in everything, because obviously the voice of children and young people comes to this scrutiny board, and also we see it at things like the corporate parenting board, and then for the children's champions, which we have across the city. But there's points in this around transport that will obviously be held at a different scrutiny board than this one. There's the point about climate change here, where everyone takes more action to protect the environment from climate change. That is young people telling all of us to do something different that maybe they don't have the platform to do in a more formal way through, say, the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee, where we have had the views of young people. But I just wondered for thought of how we could connect that up better. Obviously, there isn't a particular point within each different scrutiny board where the views of children and young people come out. And I wondered whether that's something we could look into, because I'd very much welcome, when focusing on any issue in a scrutiny board, something that would give me the background to understand what children and young people thought of that issue, so that I could better represent them in those discussions. And that's on any issue across the city, really, because obviously they don't have the opportunity to have that say democratically in electing us as politicians. So a couple there, one about the transport and how that's going and what we can do to support that further. And then around that connection with formal scrutiny, so that young people can have the chance to question us and the decisions we make as readily as adults would.
Thank you for that. Should we take a few more comments around the table, and then I can invite our guests to. So I've got Celia next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Focusing on 7 and 11, and I'd put down cultural activities as I'd read the paper, but more to take into account the different cultures that we have, and for young people and children, younger children, to experience diverse cultural activities. I think it's important to develop a cohesive city and citizens. And then the employment, children, young people have, whatever their social status, tend to have a narrow experience of employment and jobs. And to be able to widen that experience would be very constructive and important for their later employment. At Wumby, and I don't know if it still goes on, there were firms and large companies around the city who were involved in mentoring young people, and we're supposed to be an expanding city as regards business, attracting national employers to the city. And if that still goes on, can it be expanded? If it's sort of fallen by the wayside, can it be revived? I think it'd be very useful. I think in particular as regards number 8 and the impact of poverty as it as the time passes, and I think that's going to have a huge impact on an awful lot of children and families. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Celia. Councillor Forsyth, please.
Right, thank you very much. So partly what I'm going to say is sort of following on from what Councillor Kyle said, and considering about the climate emergency being a major concern for young people. But I think the answer to that, a lot of other things impact upon that. I mean, the mental health and well-being, we all know that active travel, and I'm thinking particularly of the travel to school here, is a major benefit for both health, mental and physical health. Therefore, the transport point of it, rather perhaps travel might be a better way to describe it, I think is really, really important there. So I think that my feeling, I don't know how to say this really, I think we need to make sure that we really have sort of grasped how the climate emergency, how we are mitigating it and adapting it is really sort of central to this. I mean, our young people are going to be the ones who are going to be impacted the most from the future in terms of the climate emergency.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Forsyth. Helen is next, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that the NEU, the New Workers and Young Professionals, they've pinpointed that what they want to focus on this year is and take to conference in emotion is outdoor play. And I just thought that would maybe be good to get some connection between the union, the NEU and the council and that group. And obviously the motion would go to, next April, and so it would impact the direction of the union the following year. But I think it would be good to have that connection. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Tony was next, please. I thought you had your hand up.
I think probably the key to all this is we are now getting more aware of asking young people what they want. And I think what really needs to be done now is to expand that to those people who are not involved in youth clubs, not involved in things like that, because there's a lot of children out there that are in that position and who are more aware. I think that generation are more aware than any other generation in the past, whether it be on climate change, whether it be on transport, whether it be on this. And I think the biggest need is to get as much information as we can from as many children as we can.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Kate was next, please.
Yeah, I agree with what Tony said, actually. I think it's really important to ensure that we try and reach those children, perhaps from more disadvantaged backgrounds, from the harder to reach families whose voices aren't as readily and easily heard. And I just wanted to respond to what Celia had said, actually, about some of the private companies. So it's more just by way of information, really. But my husband works for one of the big 4 accountancy firms, which is a global company. And actually what he's been doing is working with other accountancy and legal and other firms across the city to roll out a sort of diversity program. And actually they came and did a big event here with Tom Reardon recently, going out to schools and mentoring young people coming through the system from disadvantaged and BAME backgrounds and communities. So there's actually something going on in the city which would be really good, I think, if you guys could link into, because he has really enjoyed going out some of the schools in the city. Recently he went to a school in Chapeltown and talked about what he did, and took a whole group of colleagues from BAME backgrounds, and the children were just really intrigued. And one boy came up to me at the end and he was like, that was like amazing. How do I work for your firm? What do I do? I'd love to do that. So I think if we can maybe look at how we can link in, because that's just that sort of opportunity for young children particularly from those backgrounds was just, it's just really encouraging. And I think if we can roll that out on a more kind of on a wider, with the local authority linking into that, I think it will be, I mean, it's already doing really well, but I think there's real potential there to develop that into something really great for children and families in the city. So just to let people know.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Regan, please.
It's Reagan. Just expanding on the second wish, where it's saying about less crime and areas being safer. And I think if you look throughout the city, there's different elements within the city of where what crime is, what feeling safe is specifically for young children and young people. And I think we need to expand that to look about the crime and the actual poverty that lends that to crime, and how we can broaden that feeling. And I think picking up what Tony said around the disadvantaged and the unheard children and young people, that will have a massive impact into that wish.
Thank you, Councillor Reagan. Councillor Stevenson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to echo the comments made by a number of people around the table about last night's Child Friendly Leeds Awards. So well done to the team. I struggled to recognise officers this morning, and they're not dressed like spaceships or other things that they were all dressed up last night. In terms of the plan itself, one of the things that is on the 18 to 23 plan is that how will we know we've made a difference? And there's 20 gauges on there where we can measure impact. Is there a plan to update that annually with almost like a progress report? Because I think we've raised it here before in that when we look at sort of like best city plans, we're looking at the minute about what we're going to do next time, but we never really look back and say, was the last one successful? And it's important that we do measure it. So how will we know in the interim years the progress it's making against those factors that you're looking to assess?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to keep going with the comments, and then there'll be a lot to cover, but I think that we can then focus on the question then. So we've got Jackie and Councillor Howley, please. Jackie.
I think the only comment I want to make is the cost of different things, especially with energy bills going up, and poverty is a big thing with families nowadays. I'm just glad to see that with transport, because I was involved in the transport earlier before, it was changed, and children, it's nice to see that children can actually get around the city without too much problem. But I think to keep the transport's cost for children low so that they can, I think I do worry, because even though the companies do say they won't change the prices, I think they probably might, and they just say, well, petrol costs more or diesel costs more or whatever. So that would be a concern to me. But another concern that I have would be maybe, you know, with education and stuff, with catch up with COVID, children have had 2 years of being at school or not being at school because of bubbles bursting and different things. And the catch up, usually with catch ups, children do not enter into sport, especially in high schools. They come out of sports and they come out of kind of the fun stuff. And I think we need to be careful in having, you know, the catch up, not to be taking children out of the fun stuff. And that would be my comment really in that.
Thank you, Jackie. Councillor Howley, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just building on Councillor Stevenson's point on measures, I wonder whether this needs to be more ambitious in terms of not only having measures, but actually having some very specific targets to measure against in terms of these 20 measures that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bithell, please.
Thanks, Chair. I have a few points around, and I'll be jumping between questions. Apologies for that. I really agree with the idea of including play in it. I wonder whether there's something around being more specific as well, maybe with like a bracket situation of including that creative and unstructured play, because so often children's play is 2 swings and a slide, but having those opportunities to work with like the oh, it's gone out of my head, where they get like loads of rubbish stuff and recycle it and make it into scrap. That's it. Yeah. I was like, it's not trash. Difficult. So that sort of stuff, I think it would be really nice if we could just have a small nod to that style of play as well. In terms of the equality and diversity, I think that's really, really important that it comes in. Certainly for me with children who are adopted in an LGBT plus family, there's a lot of things for them to be othered about, and actually making sure that is weaved through everything that we do feels really important to me for my family, but also obviously for others. One thing that I would love to see in it is the word nurture. I couldn't find nurture in it anywhere. We had the 5 outcomes with number 1 being safe from harm, but actually I'd really love it. And obviously there's consultation to be done, so it may not go in, but to have it safe from harm and nurtured, actually, because that's safe from harm almost feels like a baseline. Like that is the absolute basic that we need to be achieving for the kids in our city. The 11 priorities as a question, I just wondered whether we'd completed any, or how that would look in terms of, would we be looking to remove some of the 11 priorities? Are any of them done? I imagine that's not the case because there are more things that are ongoing, but just wanted to check. And then I wondered whether there was the potential for adding a 12th priority and making perhaps the equality and diversity stuff as that, and then doing it as a month by month focus, because obviously then you have 12. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments I'm going to add, and there are a couple of other hands that have popped up. So just following on from what Councillor Stevenson and Councillor Howley said, actually, unlike I think it was a fair challenge of the Best Council plan to say when we were refreshing it, there wasn't a lot of things that were achieved. I would say it's a bit different with the Children and Young People's Plan, and we did do the child-friendly inquiry on this board. In my head, it was 2 years ago, but Angela thinks it was 4, which is frightening. And we did find significant progress against the outcomes. The big missing piece, which is the point I'd make for this, a lot of really good points made around the table, but the big thing we found in that inquiry was the directorate was doing all its stuff and lots of partners were doing its things. The next step was getting the whole council to take ownership of this plan and getting the whole city mobilised behind the plan, and for it not just to be something that's about children's services delivering, but actually, and so that's what I want to reflect on is A, we're thinking about have we got the right things in, but B, how do we actually make the whole council? And we've talked before about planning and development as one example. We've made some progress, but it still doesn't feel to me sitting on plans panels and things that really the voice of children is really being heard loud and clear through that directorate, for instance, and there are many others that we could point to. So that's probably the thing I'd be feeding in. So then I've got Councillor Carlill again and Councillor Bowden. Everybody wants to go again. So.
Sorry, Chair, there was one point that I forgot to bring up in my diatribe earlier, which was that bit about the diversity and celebrating that across the city. Because when I was at primary school in Hull, which wasn't in the 80s the most diverse city that you find in the UK, we were doing it the wrong way, should we say. I was sent on a bus to Dewsbury for a day to see that there were people somewhere else that looked different from me, which was interesting. And you did learn something, but obviously in the city of Leeds, we've got a huge city full of all kinds of different people that are all Leeds people that need to be, we need to widen that, because there are many communities where you don't see that full spread of the population across everywhere. And also just looking at, I mean, we've got the opportunity coming up as part of Leeds 2023 to have something in Children's Day where people can really get together as a city of Leeds. And I think I'm right in saying, I can't remember the figures that came up at some point, but the school population is more diverse than the population of Leeds as a whole, and is only going to get more and more diverse. So it's an incredibly important agenda for us to follow up. So just how that opportunity can be maximised, I guess, especially in those areas. I mean, Hannah knows my area well, and there are some villages that look very different than others that I represent. And unfortunately, they don't mix as much as I would like people to, and to have that wider understanding.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bowden, please.
Yeah, it's just a kind of a comment and a question in regards to climate change and transport. So one of the biggest benefits for climate change and transport, I guess, would be our bus systems as well. And in regards to children getting around our cities, I think about some of the inner city children. I worked quite a lot with our refugee and asylum children, and when you look at even like First Bus and their passes, to get the cheapest passes requires you to have a mobile phone. And if you've got a mobile phone, that also requires you to have digital banking and access to your parents' digital banking. And so whilst it's great, you know, to get the cheapest pass, which I think for a child in a weekly is £9, it just, to me, it would make more sense for the bus companies just to allow children to sort of access those cheaper passes just by being able to pay in cash, which would be £1.20 for the day rather than £1.20 for a single. For instance, I understand why the bus companies do it, and they're never going to do it for the rest of the population. But I think there's a real argument for our children to be like, they need to be able to access and be able to, if you're in a city, to be able to access a nice green space like Roundhay Park, you're going to need a bus. You can't walk it. And I do think it's really important that we do stress to the bus companies that these children aren't going to be able to have a mobile with an app and be able to access the digital banking. It's going to cost too much for them to do it. And I just think it just makes more sense for the children just to be able to pay £1.20 for a daily pass rather than having to use an online banking. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last three people I'm going to take, and then we'll have a chance to, there's only about 150 things for you to respond to at the minute. So I got Helen, Councillor Bithell and Councillor Forsyth.
I just wanted to point out the connection between the wish for number 10 and also the link with what Hannah talked about, nurturing. I think what makes learning settings meet children's needs is that you have got that nurture, and it's all about the people who work there and that consistency. And it's the link with what we're going to look at in November on retention of staff, because it's really important that children have those consistent staff they can build relationships with, that the staff know them, they can nurture them and see what they need. And it just kind of makes me think how important it is to address this issue around retention of teaching staff and of support staff, who are particularly good, the latter, at spotting what children need and spending time listening and conversing with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Councillor Bithell, please.
Thank you. I forgot the last part of the questions, which was the question for us was about what questions we'd like to see on the online questionnaire. And I haven't specifically got any for what I'd like to see in the ones young people respond to. But for adults, I'd really like to see the question, what's the most important thing looking back you wish you'd been protected from? Because actually we have a lot of understanding around that abuse, trauma, neglect, but actually there's other things that all of us as adults carry that it would be good if we could start protecting people from that are non sort of statutory type things. And then also in terms of getting it out to employers and partners, what would they like to see? I've put skill, but I don't know that I actually necessarily mean skill, but like attribute wise from young people. Obviously, we're a city who values its inclusive growth and its employment opportunities. So actually making sure that we are including that from the base down feels quite important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Councillor Forsyth.
Right, thank you very much. Earlier, I think it was a sort of general point I made, but what I would like to really focus on is whether anything could be prioritised about the journey to and from school. You know, we all have our own experiences of how we got to and from school, and it sort of sets habits, if you like, for a lifetime. And I just wonder whether that could be a priority, added in priority, because I mean, I'm sure my councillor colleagues have had inboxes with complaints about, you know, sort of the problems of parking around schools and some inconsiderate parents, but there are some schools which actively reward their pupils who come to school by other means. So we could share good practice there, but I just wonder whether that could be a focus from which other things will come. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there's one or two things to respond to there. So if I perhaps suggest that we start with Chris and work around from there and just respond to as much or as little as you want to, and then we can come back and see if there's any bits of the questions that we haven't covered. So Chris, over to you first.
Thank you. Start with a question, I think it was from Councillor Bitherell, around the priorities. I suppose we never wrote them with the intention of completing them as such. However, in the last 10 years of the plan, some have remained constant, some have come on, some have dropped off. So I think we would certainly expect some of them to change, if not just some of the language. Perhaps some of them may go. I did wonder about the just find the wording. There's a priority about improving at a faster rate educational progress for children and young people vulnerable to poor learning outcomes. We have wondered whether that perhaps shouldn't be a priority as such, because the plan as a whole looks at larger cohorts, and we would always say that this is a strategic document that is supported by a number of more detailed action plans. So things like the Send and Inclusion strategy, the 3A strategy, that would pick up in detail what's going on with relation to that. So it might be that that's one that I would ask whether would remain. But we've had up to 14 priorities in the past. We're not set on a particular number. So I think we would certainly consider other ones possibly coming in. Councillor Stevenson talked about the 20 measures and progress. We have had some significant disruption with COVID, particularly around the attainment reporting of that. Really pleased that we are back to examinations and assessments in schools this year. We've had less disruption with absence, although appreciate some schools have had significant absence. So we are hoping that we will have a full set of data to be able to report on, and some of those are annual, some of the figures we can report on a more regular basis. So in the past, we have reported through to the Children and Families Trust Board, and elements of that reporting has come to scrutiny. So I'm hoping that we will be able to, on a more regular basis, provide progress in terms of some of the hard numbers that support the plan as well. So that's something that we would like to see as well. In terms of targets, that Councillor Howley raised this question. We have for the last 10 years followed the OBA principles, where we've specifically not set targets but talked about turning the curve. That is something that we would hope to continue. However, I appreciate some people are more keen on targets than others, and I know that's been an issue that we have come back to in the past. So that might be a topic that we need to discuss again. So that's certainly one that I pick up and take forward. And I suppose just a final one from me before I pass over to Hannah. There's been a bit of talk about some of the language and the terminology that we use in the plan. I think we accept that however much or little we change the plan, I think there's some work to do around the language, making it a bit more consistent anyway, looking at some of the words. We've talked about healthy lifestyles to healthy lives as one. So I think we'd expect at the very least to look at some of the language just to make sure it reflects the current picture. I think we have to accept some of the terminology is 10 years old. So we probably need a good look at the language as well as the fundamental content of some of those priorities. And I think for now, if I pass over to Hannah and maybe come back if there's any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was 17 questions, but I can see that one of the top topics was around transport, and I really welcome your sort of observation, really, because that's something quite specific we can go back to providers with. So we did the work of the voice and influence team, sort of the central team, is shaped by what the top issue young people vote for. So I think it was probably 3 years ago, transport was the top issue voted for in the Make Your Mark ballot. So we did lots and lots of work with the bus providers. And so I'll have to speak to my colleague John Bradshaw to get a bit of an update about where we are. But from I know that we had done work which had meant that the costs hadn't increased. But as a colleague around the table said, we do want to ensure we don't want to lose that, do we? And because they did say in the press that they didn't increase the prices because they knew, because of the feedback of young people. So, but I'm very happy and would welcome and can support a conversation with them about the issue that you raised. So if you could support that, Councillor Khalil, that would be really helpful in your role. Would that be all right? Yeah. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I forgot to add the actual kind of context to it. So it's £9. So just about the cost breakdown, it's £9 if you've got the app for a child for the weekly. However, if they don't have the access to the app, it's 17. It will work out £17.50. And so to me, that is basically a punishment for poverty. I'm sorry your parents aren't able to provide you with a phone. I'm sorry, therefore you can't have digital access to your parents' online banking. Therefore, you're going to get charged double to use a bus. That's my major concern with that. And they might be able to say, well, our prices have kept normal, and the bus companies do this because they cannot then also do it with the concessions with those who are slightly elderly as well. It goes, oh, well, you can do it if you can use the app. Well, young people can't use the app, and sometimes some elderly people don't want to use the app. And so for me, it's just an issue with the bus companies in general, with how they're saying prices are the same. They're not the same. It's just that they've moved things to the app, and they know most people can't use them. Yeah.
So I just wonder if, because it seems a no-brainer to me, we could write as a board to, it's a quick win. We don't need to wait for a new children and young people's plan to deal with that issue. So I think it's a really good point. And Angela, if we can write on behalf of the board and see if they'll do something right away on that one. So sorry, if we carry on with your.
Am I back on? Yes. So then the second questions were about in terms of how do we ensure we're hearing the wider views of children and people? And that's as part of our approach, we have a youth voice model in the city whereby we have links and engage with lots of different youth workers and different colleagues who run youth services or youth groups, which are either issue-based, community-based, faith-based. But I think someone here was talking about the fact that but what happens if you don't go to one of those groups? How do we hear those views? So when we were developing the wishes, when you total up the number of children and young people involved, and there could potentially be some duplication because it's over a 3-year period, it was just over 80,000 children and young people. And those large figures are from, we do something called the My Health, My School survey. So they are children and people in school, but a lot of those aren't involved in any youth provision. So they're sharing their views and their experiences. So that does capture a lot of those views. But if anyone wants any further information about the consultations we use to develop the wishes and things, we can get that for you. And Councillor Reagan mentioned about the different issues in the different areas. It was really interesting developing that wish because some young people use the term antisocial behaviour, but when we did the deeper consultation, what does that mean? And so they wanted to take that out. So it was more listing around sort of crime, vandalism, but there's a detailed in the youth work review that was done in the different areas, specifically what were the issues. So that's a really valuable report that I think can be shared if you're wanting to see for those specific areas. Councillor Stevenson talked about, is there a plan to provide an update annually. And that's something I really see now I manage the Child Friendly Leeds team and Voice and Influence team. When we talk about the wishes, these are really clear and easy to understand for children and families and for the whole city, really. And I think one of the things we want to work towards is giving an update in really child-friendly, therefore family-friendly speak about how we're working towards some of these wishes. What things have we achieved? What have we got in place? So that's something I'll be looking to produce on behalf of the team in partnership, and we can share that with you and bring that back to you. Transport. If there's anything else. And Councillor Lamb, you mentioned that one of the things we really need to do is get the whole city and different directorates working towards the plan. So that really is in the next stage of our sort of strategic planning for child friendly, to be working much more across different directorates. And I hope that the strategic play officer will play quite a key role in that, in terms of, I know you talked about in the scrutiny inquiry is Leeds Child Friendly City, about specifically around planning and putting that lens of the child and play around planning. So sort of watch this space on that. So we'll have a bit more dedicated support to hopefully make that happen. I think I've covered most of the main bits there. Hope that's okay. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Shaheen, did you want to make any observation?
I do. Thank you very much, Councillor Lamb. I think it's building on the point of play and the importance of that. And we discussed that at one of our leadership team meetings regarding fun, or the fun really features heavily in how can we get back to that idea and notion of having fun through play, and how therapeutic that is as an activity itself. And really then it hits all the other priorities around social, emotional, mental health and well-being. How can we allow our children to feel and to be at the point that they don't need to feel they need to grab a gadget, but they can feel fine in their own space, in their own mind. And there's a direct correlation then, but research shows us, between not having that structured play, having time on their own, and having to feel the need to always be doing and being busy. And that actually does impact on mental health and well-being. So for us, we had that conversation. How can we increase the engagement with fun? And how can we do that through play? I think that's quite significant for us to really consider within that. And the comments around EDI and thinking about representation within our school settings, our communities and our population, and also does that feature explicitly on the plan? I think that was another conversation we had around it. It's a behaviour, underpins everything, but do we need to be explicit? And by doing that, what we're sending is a message to everybody involved. And as Councillor has pointed out, this is a cross-sector piece of work to galvanise support in the city, local and regional and national, that actually we are committed to, but we're committed to move from what we would say is commitment to what is reality, so what is actionable. And to do that, I think we need to just consider that as part and parcel of that. And within that as well, is we're saying actually it's fun to be who you are. So really coming back full circle into that and welcoming everybody for themselves and how unique they are as well. So there's just a couple of points there. In terms of mentoring young people, we have some support with our employment and skills part of the council, who really do work on those pathways. I'm thinking about the mentoring opportunities out there. So it was really keen to listen to visits to schools, and there is a connect there. I think that we can really work on what are the transition periods. And as Chris has pointed out rightly, we have other plans that sit underneath this. So the 3A strategy and the Ascending Inclusion works on breaking down the main priorities and obsessions into a really clear work stream that we can directly show some impact. So for us, one of the biggest areas that we may feed into the Children and Young People's Plan is reading as an obsession, because we are obsessing on that as part of the 3As. And that is your way out of poverty. And the research shows that actually it is not one, but it's the determiner of a child's future success. So the question to us is, are we obsessing about that as a route out of? And all the regulatory bodies that we have, Department of Education and Ofsted, all of their research, it's gone on for about 10 years now, is around early reading. And again, direct correlation between that and a child's self-belief, self-esteem, social, emotional, mental health is, do they feel they can access a curriculum, but can they access confidently the curriculum that's on offer, and can they then access that later in life? And there is a piece of work for us in terms of thinking really clearly that there is a cost prevention here for us, that if we make it an absolute priority and an obsession, and we all galvanise behind that, we are looking at children who will not enter the prison population at 78% unable to read and illiterate. So there's a real clear line of sight for us that we need to sort of hold in within this. And what does that look like? And I think that that would give us some impetus to move to supporting that whole agenda really as well. So just a couple of observations there. And there's lots of questions, so I'm sorry if I missed anything out in that, but I'm sure colleagues will pick up some other aspects. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to pick up on the whole council plan, and the whole council being part of this plan and taking responsibility for it. We've had certainly some significant support over the last 12 months from our colleagues in other departments to really enable us to meet the needs of children and families. So I think to have that within this plan would be really significant, and I would certainly welcome that, Councillor. Also, just the transport issue I wanted to pick up on, just to say completely agree with what people have been saying in terms of the importance of transport, particularly for our children looked after, and what that means for them being able to kind of get around the city, being able to get to school, really is a huge part of being able to kind of live their lives. And also just wanted to pick up on the equality and diversity, and that being a golden thread throughout. And again, significant piece of work being done in children's social work, but also in adults and health in terms of social work and our workforce race equality standards, just around our workforce, but really important to have it as a golden thread throughout this plan, really significant. So just 3 points really.
We'll keep going. Hopefully we'll get through the list by the end. So for me, I think it was a really interesting point about other scrutiny boards. And I know when I speak to Hannah, Hannah reminds me at times that actually we already have a wealth of information and feedback from children and young people. Sometimes they can get a little bit frustrated actually when they've already shared their views, they've told us what would make a difference for them. So I suppose for me, there's perhaps something about actually how are we sharing the feedback that we've got already, perhaps with other scrutiny boards, and is there something about having shared that information, how other scrutiny chairs perhaps weave that into their work? So I think that's something that we could possibly look at. As Ruth has said, we've had, and Shaheen, we've had really good live conversations around equality, diversity, inclusion, and how we weave that in. Some of the conversations we had was really, should that not feature really lively in terms of the vision? Because actually, if our vision is about a child-friendly city, do you know what I mean? Surely at the centre of that has got to be equality, diversity and inclusion. So that's some of the reflections we had. Again, thinking about employment, training, opportunities for children and young people. Last night, I think at the Child Friendly Leeds Awards was a fantastic example of networking. So I certainly had a little pocket of business cards in my when I went home, and that's something that Shaheen and I will be following up with others this week, so I think we're doing well on that. We've got our Child Friendly Leeds ambassadors, who bring in a whole range of rich opportunities for children and families that otherwise we would not have, but we can do more, we can do better. So that's got to be a priority. Thinking about the point around, I suppose, play, but also thinking about children feeling safe, in some of those issues. I suppose for me, there's something about places, spaces, and linking those two together, actually, thinking about that point about outdoor space, actually, are we going to encourage children to utilise outdoor space? How can we facilitate that? But if they don't feel safe, within their communities, then it's a non-starter. So for me, there's something about linking those two together. I think in terms of speaking to, listening to, and acting on the voice of children across the city, there is a diverse range of feedback, you know, and Hannah's talked about some of those, but I suppose I just wanted to perhaps highlight the fact that we do have children looked after, we do have care leavers, we do have children who are involved in our youth justice service. So there are many children across the city who, you know, facing disadvantaged or in marginalised groups who do really contribute actively to the plan. I think one of the biggest things for me is the you said, we did. And I suppose it goes back to my original point. You know, we know, you know, some of the feedback that we have on a daily basis from children and families. So for me, there's something about actually how do we feed back to those children the progress that we are making? And I suppose for me, that links with the OBA approach. You know, what is it that we're doing? How well are we doing it, and what difference have we made? And I think there's a real opportunity to think about how we feed that back to children and families. Certainly when I've met with children and young people and taken that approach in terms of children looked after and care leavers, you know, they've really, really appreciated that. I think the point about nurture, I think is really key as well. And I think for me, that really links with, as others have said, with well-being, but it also really links with us being a compassionate city, you know, and I think that's where that kindness, that empathy is absolutely key. I think that also links with our restorative practice approach, you know, so I think that's a really, really important comment. And I'll perhaps just finish just in relation to the cross-council working and cross-council approach, and you know, child-friendly Leeds being a whole city approach. We've seen fantastic developments throughout the pandemic in terms of really harnessing the support that is available from other directorates and also from the from partners. So I think the refresh of this plan is a real opportunity to revisit some of those conversations explicitly and you know, agree some really clear points of action. And I'll finish there.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for all your contributions. I'll start with the reference to diversity and inclusion and ensuring that the plan is relevant to all children, because Councillor Carnill's right, the population of Leeds will become more diverse because the primary school, you can see that in the primary school population data. I've referred a number of times to the fact that Gipton and Hare Hills is the most deprived ward of the city with the most children. It's also one of the most diverse wards of the city. So it is really important that the plan is relevant to all children across the city. The climate emergency was mentioned a few times, and we know that climate anxiety is a real issue for children, but also research indicates that children that are climate activists suffer less, which sounds counterintuitive because you'd think that wasn't the case when you're engaging with the material. But the anxiety is often about feeling powerless. And if you're doing something, you feel like you've got agency. So I think given it is so important to children and all of us, but it is something children are really passionate about, that does need to be included in a bigger way than it has been in previous situations of the plan. I think the point about reaching all children so we get their voices into the plan is really crucial, and Hannah's outlined how her team do reach into communities to work with a diverse range of children. Just to give you another example, I'm doing quite a lot of work across my adults and children's portfolio at the moment with the Gypsy and Traveller community. I'm doing a piece of work that I'm really excited about with the Lord Mayor and Hannah's team and GATE, the Gypsy and Traveller Exchange, to bring a group of Gypsy and Traveller children into the Civic Hall. We're doing like the equivalent of a community committee youth summit for some children from the Gypsy and Traveller community, because that's not an opportunity they would get in the way that children do who come in from some of our schools to the summits. So they're going to get to meet the Lord Mayor. We're going to do a whole session on democracy, and that feels like a really I think that'll be a start of a piece of work with that community in particular to engage children from the gypsy and travel community in the plan, but also in democracy within the city. I'm really passionate about the keeping in the children having fun. I've really championed it in a number of the meetings that I'm involved with and that I chair, particularly in the context of the gravity of the last few years and how serious and intense it's been for children, and really wanting to protect their right to have fun. It wasn't going to be a work stream of the corporate parenting strategy, and I had it put in because it felt like it's really important. We will include play in a bigger way in this situation of the plan. I really like the word nurture as well. I will also end with your point, Chair, about the whole council needing to be involved in the plan. As Julie said, child-friendly Leeds is about the whole city being responsible for children, being responsible for the city being a great place for children and families. It was launched 10 years ago, so as you know, it's the 10th birthday, but it was launched at the point we were inadequate, and it was a recognition that we could only improve children's services if the whole city was engaged. We couldn't do it on our own as a council. We needed those partnerships. And last night was such a visual representation of the whole city being engaged. You know, there were loads of children and people at the event, but there were also people from, you know, schools and colleges and the private sector and charities, and just it felt like the city coming together. And I think your challenge is really right, Chair, and really appropriate. With corporate parenting, it's been one of the things we've sort of driven in the last year, is recognising that it's not only the Children's Services Department that's the corporate parent, it's the whole council. So some of the work that we've done has included, we've got a really good partnership of working between Children's Services and Housing that's like massively improved over the last year, and that was about sort of working with Housing for them to recognise that care leaves at their housing are their children, you know, and so we've got like really direct links now where we've got particularly looked after children and foster families and looked after care leavers in housing need. We've got some really direct routes to be able to make sure that they're appropriately housed when they're having difficulties. So I think that's a really good challenge about the whole council being responsible for children. It was mentioned in the Ofsted report, actually. They specifically said one of the lines was children are the top priority for the council, and I felt really pleased that to external people coming in, that had been really obvious from talking not only to us but also a range of partners and children and young people themselves. So we will definitely take that whole council involvement forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of follow-up points. Councillor Bithell, please.
Thank you. I thought when I said about being nurtured, that was a really important point, and I stand by that. But having had it then reflected back in your responses, actually, I think maybe it even needs to go further, because what I'd actually like is for every child to feel loved, whether that's by their family, by staff at school, whether it's by carers. Actually, that feels like it needs to even be stronger than nurtured. Nurture is kind of a corporate word, and actually it's the love that they need to feel. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie, please.
I just thought something while we were all speaking, and I've got 4 young adults, and they're quite influenced by social media. And I would like a question, you know, in the survey would be, how social media affects you. Are you influenced by all the likes, followers, influencers? And I think that would be a good thing to see where children are, especially in, you know, as a number 2 in regard to their mental health, because these things aren't real. And I think a lot of children think they are. And a lot of children are on social media very, very young now. Children have phones from the age of 10, 11, and maybe younger. So these kind of things, I think if we knew how young children are, first of all, with social media and how it affects them, you know, in a general sort of way, so at least we know where they're coming from. If you know, like when I grew up, I hadn't any of this. social media is a huge thing in their lives now, and I think it might be a question to be asked. I just thought it might be a good idea, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Councillor Carlisle and then Kate, and I'll bring Shaheen back in.
Two quick comments, really. One, the point about transport, the bits that Councillor Bowden's referring to there is the fair deal arranged by the mayor, and that's a good point of where it's not working. I think the mayor would really appreciate some more power to her elbow to enable her to have those discussions more robustly with operators. So I suggest if you were going to take that point on and right, then a letter to the mayor would be really useful, because I know that's a discussion with operators around what we can get as a city, and I think she'd appreciate that strength. And just to comment, that I really agree with Julie's point that I think we do have a real wealth of information that we hear, listen to, and gather from young people. And sometimes I think it's that when I'm on I get the benefit of that being on both the corporate parenting board and being one of the children and young people's champions. But there's times I've been on other scrutiny boards around where I feel that there's opportunities to further share that knowledge that haven't necessarily been taken. So yeah, being in any scrutiny board, there is always the voice of children and young people that I think we've got, and often I've heard what they've said around that from reports I've seen from children's services and from the voice and influence team, but it's not always reflected to members as they go into that meeting. Therefore, they're not allowed don't have the opportunity to say that forward, and I think that's the real gap. Absolutely, to have further opportunities to act on the information that children and young people give us is I think really valuable. I'll take those comments.
Thank you for that. Kate, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with what Jackie said about the impact of social media on children and young people. Now it's a very different sort of society for our children and young people than as it was for when we were obviously growing up. And just sort of thinking about obviously protective factors in regards to some of the more negative aspects of social media, and also thinking about how looking at the wishes and ultimately how can children and young people engage in a lot of what's actually listed in their wishes, and thinking about what Councillor Bithell was saying about nurture and love. And ultimately, I think it comes down to children and young people having opportunities to develop self-esteem and confidence and resilience, because you can't really engage in anything if you don't have those basic fundamentals. And what do children and young people actually really understand by the terminology well-being? Because again, it's quite a corporate term really, and I think it breaks down into those key things. And if we can maybe reflect some of that as well in the questionnaires and think about that in our plan, and how when you were talking about reviewing some of the language, because I think those things are maybe easier for children to understand, that terminology. So yeah, I think that would be good to look at as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Shaheen, you wanted to come in, and then I'll go through the questions and make sure we've captured everything we need to.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to pick up on the point I think Councillor Bithell's made. It's a very, very, very pertinent point about the love, and children who are not loved go to school to be loved. And it's how do we bring that aspect into everything that we do within the school system, and further than that across sort of council and the work that we have directly with children and young people. And something that we will be working on when we refresh our 3As again is a concept around unconditional positive regard. And how do we build that into the school system? Because that will alleviate some of the pressures that our children are facing and feeling when they don't feel they belong or are loved. And it's a very quick win, but it's hearts and minds. And how do we bring that as a given practice and a basic expectation into that system? And I think a point to make about the wishes, and we were talking about this last night, is actually, are they wishes or are they entitlement? And is there a way of thinking about that? Because actually our children should not have to make a wish to us because they know everything. They can teach us, quite a lot. But actually it is an ask and it should be a give and ask, and it should be an entitlement. And within that, there should be the love as sort of real golden thread, as Ruth was saying, with EDI running through that as a golden thread, is how can we get love to really feature heavily, because then that aspect of EDI will come into that as well. So there's just a few points there for us to really consider, because this feels like a basic entitlement, and what we want to do is get to the offer, which is love, unconditional and positive regard, and everything that would come from that, not what the Equalities Act would be. They are basic entitlements for our children and young people.
Councillor Bowden.
Hi, yeah, it's in regards to sort of play and nurture. So working in primary education for quite a long time and working in some social and emotional and mental health schools, there are really fantastic schemes that really incorporate both really good quality play and the play that involves and is designed to be nurturing and caring, which many children might not get at home, for instance. But ultimately I did a recent visit to a primary school, and year one is a fantastic transition between really play orientated in reception, but then the transition into what's going to happen in the other years. And I was speaking to the head, and she said, well, coming out of COVID, and a lot of these children haven't had the interactions with other children, that they are actually using year one to have more focus on play. But in the same breath, I could see it in her eyes that there's stress there, because ultimately something will give, and it might be this time then that's could have been focused on reading, on spellings. And I think we really need things like Ofsted and the inspections to give far more weight to play and to nurture, because it's so great that we're saying this, and we've got these organisations already out there in primary schools and secondary schools. But if there's no weight to them providing this, again, I was in primary education for 9 years. I know the pressures that are there, and the struggle for them to actually go out and achieve this is going to be so much harder, because it won't be acknowledged. And they could be doing all these brilliant work, but ultimately when an inspection comes in, it's just completely disregarded. So I think we do need like Ofsted to be completely on board in regards to what sort of play is being provided by the schools, how children are growing up and being taught how vital it is for them to do this, and actually how they can be nurtured, how they can interact being nurtured as well. And you know, it is a bit frustrating because I can't remember what it was, but the schemes and that I went through, it wasn't just for the reception children. The profound impact that even 9-year-olds would have sitting in a circle and going through some really just nice games and singing. They'd never done it before, and they haven't done it since they were in reception. And you would find actually it tackled things like bullying, because sorry, I'm a bit unstuck, but yeah.
No, thank you for that. It's really, really helpful. Okay, if I can draw everyone's attention to paragraph 6 on page 18, and then we can just look at the questions that we've been asked and make sure we've covered them off. So first one is around mental health and well-being, which is currently referenced. My sense was, as a consensus around the table, that it should absolutely be a much higher priority. I would take Kate's point on board, actually, that the word well-being is convenient because it captures lots of things, but does it mean what it needs to mean to children and young people? And the point's been made about looking at language, and I think that's one where mental health and health generally should be a priority, but just getting the language right, I think, and then the measuring is challenging for something like that. But I think I guess it would be, as Hannah referred to, the My Health, My School survey is probably the mechanism to do that, unless anyone's got other suggestions for that. But other than that, I think we've covered that. So I think the board would agree that should be a much higher priority. I think we've covered the points about having fun and play, and absolutely play should feature in the refreshed plan. I think there's thought about how that's to be measured, and noting the points around Ofsted, which is not necessarily in our gift to deliver, but it is a point we can certainly make, and perhaps something we can look at as a council. I think the climate emergency has certainly come up loud and clear as a big thing for this board on behalf of children. In terms of the consultation, it strays into the question about how Scrutiny would like to be involved. I think it might be useful for us to see what's proposed to go in the consultation, and it's easier to comment at that point if we think there's anything missing or unnecessary. So if that's something we can work in, Angela, if the timing works. Transport, that's come through loud and clear. I think we've definitely covered that. I think we've covered equality and diversity and the importance of making sure that runs through and making sure it's accessible to everybody, regardless of their circumstances, and making sure within the consultation we're reaching out and really going and we've got a brilliant voice and influence team. We're very lucky in Leeds. But even for them, it's a challenge to engage absolutely everybody, and it's just trying to constantly find new ways to do that. So, Chris, is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted us to touch on?
I think that's probably covered all the main points that we wanted to do, and as I said, some additional bits came up as well, which is useful. So there's more than enough for us to go away and distill and try and sum that up. So it may be that as we go through these things come up, that we may need to come back with, particularly if we can come back with the questions around the consultation, that might be really helpful. But I think for now, that from my point of view, certainly that's been really valuable information to take away. So thank you very much.
As you know, Chris, we're only here to help on this point. And then in terms of how Scrutiny would want to be involved, my suggestion would be, if it's possible to see those questions before they go to the consultation, I think that would be helpful. And then perhaps if we can see the responses and where you're going with that, rather than wait until it's absolutely ready to go to exec board and things, I think it'd be useful if we could see it a little bit before that and have an input if that works with your timeline. And hopefully we can add some value to things there. Okay, so I think we've covered all the recommendations on that one. So that's been a really good discussion. So thank you to everybody for all the contributions. And it's so important. The thing that struck me within that is, I think it's 10 years since we started the first plan. When we finish the next iteration, anyone who was born in the first year will be 20 years old and going into adulthood and will have lived through all of this. And that's what to admit, it's about the impact on it's real. This is not just a document. It's about really impacting on children's lives, and young people have lived right through the whole process, and we've got to make sure we get this absolutely right. So again, thank you for bringing it to us at this early stage and giving us the chance to really contribute to it. So thank you. So on to item 9, which is the work schedule. We talked about possible items we could look at our last meeting, which was quite an extensive list. So we agreed that we'd go away, myself and Angela, and we met with Sal and Julie and Shaheen to look at this. So I think there's probably 2 or 3 key things that have come out of that. So what our suggestion was, we kind of grouped things firstly into areas where we've got very much a watching brief. And we felt the way to do that was perhaps the first part of all our meetings. There were a lot of things that were suggested that are things we're either monitoring anyway, or are things that are just to keep us up to date that we want to keep an eye on. So the first part of each of our meetings, we'd focus on those, and then the second part of each meeting would be much more in depth, and we'd look at that in 2 parts. One would be themed sessions where we can group together a lot of the things under one umbrella that we've looked at, and then we wanted to make sure we didn't have, as we discussed last time, a scattergun approach where we look at a whole array of things and don't actually have an impact on anything. So there are 2 or 3 areas where some that we'd already identified about the workforce, issues around schools and social work, So that's absolutely one that we've got programmed in. And then if I can ask Angela just to run through sort of what the proposal is and see if everyone's come to. I noted Councillor Bithell had a comment, so I'll bring you in a second, and then if anyone else has got any thoughts to add.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. As you mentioned, there was quite a number of areas identified, and within the covering part, paragraph 2, I've actually listed those as a reminder. So following the discussion that we had with the director and other senior officers, again, it was about areas of priority where it's felt the scrutiny board could add real value this year. And 3 in particular were identified, and as Councillor Lamb explained, it's not taking away some of the theme discussions that we'll also incorporate into the work schedule. But one of the priorities is around workforce planning, and I know that was picked up in particular at the board meeting last month. So it's proposed that the board undertakes an in-depth review of children's services workforce planning, and that we come back in September with draft sort of terms of reference to determine the scope of that moving forward in terms of it being more of an in-depth piece of work. The other priority is about maintaining a watching brief on the new schools bill and the consequential impacts locally. And again, it's proposed that we use the September meeting to have that initial discussion on the schools bill and then decide thereafter what further scrutiny may be needed. And the other priority was about reviewing the existing Leeds SEND and inclusion strategy within the context of the recommendations and proposals that are stemming from the SEND green paper and also the independent review of children's social care. So there's an item on the Leeds strategy in November with a view to undertaking that piece of work. So the board's work schedule still includes the traditional items of scrutiny activities such as our performance, budget monitoring, and it's still also reflective of the board's earlier commitments to track other key strategic plans, which again was just referenced in the earlier item around the 3 years plan, the youth justice plan and the child poverty strategy. So they'll be all woven into the type of themed approach that Councillor Lamb's mentioned. So the latest version set out in Appendix 1 for members' consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Angela. So we try to cover as much of the things that were put forward as we can, but also make sure we can have a real impact in those key areas that we've identified. So hopefully that meets with your approval. But I know, Councillor Bithell, you wanted to.
Thank you. Yeah, I have concerns about the 29th of March and it being an incredibly busy meeting that we then don't actually end up effectively doing justice to. Certainly the youth justice plan is something that I think is really important, and I mentioned previously. I wonder if, in order that we can look at the things that we most want to look at perhaps within that, whether there is capacity for us as a board to request certain things in it, or me as an individual to do that and to request that we get the targeted information that we want to scrutinise. Does that go through you?
Yeah, we can absolutely do all of that. And I'm conscious we don't currently have a meeting scheduled in April or May. I suspect that may need to change to be able to cover all these things off. But we've got time to work on the terms of reference, to focus on the things we want to look at. And the sooner all of that's fed in, the sooner we can get all the information and start getting the work together. So yeah, if you just send it to myself and Angela, any suggestions or requests, and we can start to work on that. Yeah, Councillor Stevenson.
It was just on a point that Councillor Bithell made in a previous meeting, I think, regarding young offenders. And we've constantly talked about the idea, but never actually achieved to have a meeting at the young offenders in Wetherby. And I don't know how we do it in terms of public recording, etc. But it might be an idea to actually have the discussion on the youth justice plan at young offenders at Wetherby, so we could have a chance to have a tour, understand, and then have our normal meeting in place, which might happen at another time, but it's something to consider.
It's very much in my mind to do exactly that. Okay, any other thoughts or comments, or is everybody happy? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bromley, you had your hand.
Thank you, Chair. Something's been brought to my attention. It's quite specific, and I just wondered if it could be brought in maybe later down the line, or if not, it's coming to the end of today, but still. Melatonin prescriptions, apparently There's been a large number of families self-prescribing, buying online, because the waiting list for this medication on cans is currently about 18 months, and ICANN won't deal with just sleep alone. So looking at maybe GPs and ICANN being able to prescribe and Scope Sleep Right service apparently is fully aware of this and has flagged this as a concern already. I'm just wondering if it's something we could bring to scrutiny at some point coming up.
Yeah, it's probably whether it would come to our board or to the health board.
Right, okay.
But I wonder perhaps if Julie, that's something we can pick up outside the meeting and see what the best way to take it forward is. Okay, so the final thing, we've said lots of nice things about Celia. So I wonder, I can't think of anything, unfortunately, Celia, horrible to say about it. But Celia, do you have any, I should really give you the last word. Well, I'll still have the last word, but I'll give you the pre-last word. Yeah. Your microphone, after 20 years, you'd think you'd have got the hang of this by now.
Yeah, but as 20 years, you know, being a teacher, you just think you can shout at everybody. Yeah, I had my last union national exec meeting last week, and I felt absolute relief when it was over. And I thought, thank God I don't have to trail down here again. I feel regret leaving this board, and it's been so interesting. I found it incredibly insightful, getting such a broad picture of children's services. As we were saying in the early days, we included leisure centres and cemeteries, which was very broad, but maybe less interesting. And I've just found it always very supportive, positive, and you feel as if you are doing something, wide range of people involved. And I think it's far more, Bob Gettins said, it's more democratic now than when it used to be the actual council and councillors just on the education committee. I think it's far more informative. It's been an absolute delight. I've seen how you access it, so I might be watching in September. That sounds a bit sad, but who knows what September will be like. There is, I think, still some cake over there. Please don't leave it to go to waste. Just thank you.
Thank you, Celia, for everything, and you've been fantastic. To the final word. So that brings to item 10, the date and time of next meeting. It sounds ages away, but it probably isn't. So Wednesday, the 7th of September is the next time we'll be back at 10 o'clock, usual time, with a pre-meeting at 9:45. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.